Wealth management is not just for the wealthy. Everyone is entitled to their best retirement possible. Welcome to The Retirement Engineer with Jim Kruzan, your path to a bigger, bolder retirement. Brought to you by Kaydan Wealth Management, a firm that specializes in serving the mobility technology industry. In this podcast, we help you maximize your resources and engineer your best retirement through a process-driven approach so you can get the little things right. Drawing from years of expertise, Jim and his guests will simplify complex wealth management strategies and explore actionable ideas to help you protect your hard-earned wealth and take control of your future. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to another episode where we dive deep into the heart of family caregiving with our returning guest, Becky Eizen from Eizen Consulting Group. I'm Patrice Sikora alongside Jim Kruzan, and today we're tackling the intricate world of long-term care. Becky will guide us through the maze of deciding on the best care options, understanding their financial implications, and navigating the emotional journey of caregiving. We'll also uncover practical strategies for balancing the demanding roles of being a caregiver and a career, and ensuring that your own retirement and well-being do not fall by the wayside. Jim, take us forward.
All right. Once again, welcome back, Becky Eizen. For those who hadn't heard the prior episode, we had Becky on, and she spent half an hour talking about all the things that we need to know about identifying issues as part of aging and resources available for providing some degree of help. For those who didn't hear the last episode, Becky certainly is an expert in this field. She's the founder and CEO of Eizen Consulting Group. She's a certified senior advisor. She's a certified dementia practitioner. She's a board certified patient advocate, and she's a certified Alzheimer's disease and dementia care trainer. In addition, Becky holds an MBA from Georgia State University. So we're so happy to welcome Becky back. Becky, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
This topic is so vast. And as I mentioned previously, we could spend multiple half-hour segments. So I understand that at the very best, we're just brushing the surface. And hopefully it provides some opportunity for people to say, hey, this might be something I'm interested in. Let me dig deeper. And we'll certainly have resources available. And I would say check the show notes, as we'll certainly have those there. Long-term care is really a broad-based topic, and people have a tendency to kind of look at that just from the standpoint of insurance, but that's just one of the ways to solve this issue of long-term care. Back in the day, I understood it as there are several things we can do. We can deny it will ever exist, in which case we just let things play out as they are. And we have Medicaid kind of as a backstop to provide care if we spend down our resources. We could accept the risk and self-insure if we're fortunate enough to have the resources available, or we could attempt to transfer the risk to a third party. And that's kind of where long-term care insurance comes in, and that's a viable solution. But I wanted to tackle this whole issue of what exactly is long-term care, and more importantly, how that differs from Medicare, because there's an awful lot of folks who think, oh, I'm covered, I'm 65 or older, I have Medicare. So Becky, interested in your thoughts.
I thought I would share real quick with the audience, statistically speaking, as we continue to get older, what does that mean? I looked up some statistics last night, and, in Michigan, by the year 2030, 25% of our population will be over the age of 60. 1 in 4, a lot of people. We're a little ahead of the nation, where about 22% will be in that age group. And life expectancies, as we know, are going up. That being said, as we dive into the conversation of long-term care, what exactly does that mean? Long-term care insurance is a way to pay for that long-term care, as you mentioned. But what does that mean, long-term care? And really, long-term care as a definition is, for an individual, it just means that you need help with some personal care, that your health is declining, or when you're having difficult performing what we talked about, activities of daily living, which we talked about in our prior episode, right? bathing, toileting, eating, transferring. And so the question becomes, what do I do when I need long-term care? Who's going to help me? And how am I going to pay for that? Long-term care, typically what happens is someone in the family provides that care, right? When you wake up and all of a sudden you're a caregiver. And, we can talk about caregiving burnouts, what that looks like in another episode, perhaps. But for the sake of what we're talking about today, long-term care is providing that level of care, whether that level of care is going to happen in your home, by a loved one, or by a hired caregiver, which we'll talk about. So again, there's two ways to do long-term care. You can do it in your home, or you can move to another environment, which I think we'll get into as well. But as far as Medicare, you mentioned Medicare and you mentioned Medicaid. When people are at home and they need caregiving, and the caregiver is a loved one, or maybe the loved one does it part-time and they need to continue to work, then you might need to bring out outside support. And what does that look like? How are you going to pay that person? In the space of care, there's two types. There's skilled care, which is your physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech. That is paid for by Medicare. It is very short in duration, and it's meant to get you stronger than prior to an accident or an injury or perhaps a surgery. So that's skilled care paid for by Medicare. What we're talking about here as far as long-term care is the caregiving component. That is called non-skilled care. That is private pay. So you have to pay for that somehow, whether it's through a long-term care policy, from your private funds and your investments. Folks who are veterans can sometimes be eligible for veterans benefits that might pay for care. But the bottom line is you have to pay for that care. That is not paid for by Medicare. Big distinction there, and a big shock to folks when I sit down with them and talk to them about the costs of what that looks like.
When you talk about long-term care, do you have any idea as to what percentage of long-term care is being provided through, let's say, insurance, as opposed to being provided through family members in home, as opposed to outside services providing the same care in home?
When it comes to a long-term care policy, my older adults, if you will, those that are in their 80s, I would say probably 30% have a long-term care policy. And long-term care policies look very different now than when they took them out in the 80s. What is an education for individuals with a long-term care policy is, unfortunately, it is not always the golden ticket that people view it as. And there you have to qualify for that insurance policy. And you qualify for that long-term care insurance policy to start paying out in two ways. Either you have a cognitive decline, meaning you have some type of diagnosis of dementia, or you have a physical decline and that you're unable to perform 2 of the 5 or 6 activities of daily living. That's an easier way to qualify, is when you are physically declining, because you can see it, right? You can see that someone can't get dressed in the morning. You can see that someone can't feed themselves. You can see that someone can't transfer or get on and off of the toilet. On a cognitive decline, what I'm finding is many policies have a verbiage in their policies that say that a client has to be severely cognitively impaired. I have asked many insurance organizations, can you define for me, what does severely mean? And they can't. So that's when we have to go for some additional testing, like neuropsych exams, which are probably around 4 hours in length, and you get an exhaustive report of the cognitive deficits that someone might have. In the world of long-term care, it's wonderful that you have the policy. It's another to open it, and it can be an exhausting process. I mean, I help people open those, but it's not as easy as it sounds. You can't just call and say, I have a claim. I want to open my policy now. It can be very, very difficult, challenging process. So that's one aspect. In Michigan, a private caregiver can run you anywhere from $30 to $35 an hour. minimum hours, typically 6 to 8 hour shifts. People don't want to do a short shift. It doesn't make sense, right, for someone's lifestyle. You can also do a live-in, which is a different avenue you could go down as far as a per day price, which is in the range of around $300 a day. But there are parameters you have to meet for a live-in. You can do the math, at $30 a day. In Michigan, which I think is really important for the audience to know, is there's no licensure for caregiving organizations. And so what that means is I could go and put up a sign in a strip mall and Becky's Caregiving open for business, and there's really no oversight. There's no one to come and make sure that I'm hiring my folks properly. What's my background check? What's my training process? What's the follow-up process? And so in Michigan, it's the wild, wild west, as I like to say. And so, when you're determining who's going to come in privately, there's a checklist that I'll be sending to you so you can share with your viewers that people can use when they're looking for caregivers. Sometimes family members can be compensated. That's another entity that you can look at. Insurance companies will allow that, some won't. But yeah, those are some ways to pay for in-home care for people who want to age in place. And most people want to age in place and stay in their home. And I respect that 100%. I draw the line in the sand when safety is involved.
You mentioned the caveats and the things to look at with respect to long-term care policies. I was reviewing a policy a few years back, and there's a disclaimer in there that said that on cognitive issues, it actually required a hospital stay prior to being admitted to a long-term care facility. And in many cases, the course of events with diagnoses and everything else doesn't necessarily ever require a hospital stay. How do you back the truck up and, get admitted to a hospital on this issue? It's just another way of delaying claim or making it difficult to make claim on the policy. Years ago, I had an aunt who was never married and lived in the home that my grandfather built many, many years before. And she became my responsibility later in life. And I spent many weeks, driving to and from Indiana for a quick visit as she was forced to go into a nursing home for rehab and then back to a hospital and on and on. And at one point, we had home health care, but she didn't have an extended family to provide care. So we ended up having somebody who was there basically live in. But that was only 15 or 16 hours a day by contract. And then we had another person who would come in on an 8-hour shift to cover nighttime because she just could not be left alone. So it was 24-hour care, which can be ridiculously expensive. And just coordinating all of that is quite burdensome. Going back to home health care, what are some of the things that you've noticed that are where you see family members do a really, really good job with providing long-term care in home? And those other issues where the family member isn't the best person to provide that type of coverage?
Being a caregiver can be an incredibly rewarding job. I'll say the word job, but you do it from love. It's also very, very exhausting. The term caregiver burnout and caregiver fatigue, it is real. And I like to use the example of when you're on an airplane and they talk about the oxygen mask. If they were to, drop down, you put the mask on yourself first, right? And then on your child, whoever else. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't do a good job of taking care of others. So there are some family members that do a great job. Others, again, that don't do a great job and probably should not be providing that caregiving. The problem comes in how are you going to pay for the caregiving and financial distress that it can cause. It can bankrupt families, as far as the money that it costs. And that's when we talk about, is it better to live at home or do we talk about an alternative living environment? But I also think bringing in someone who understands the caregiving process, someone who is perhaps in the business, because you might not know how to deal with someone properly who has cognitive decline. You might not know how to transfer someone properly, and you might hurt yourself and your loved one. So again, having someone come in who perhaps is a home health aide or a certified nursing assistant or has hands-on care because they've been doing this for years and years and years. I think that you're caring for an individual and your loved one, and you want to give them the best care. And that might not necessarily be you as an individual. And so I think looking outside and who can provide the best care to my loved one, and recognizing that might not be me, and it might not even be plausible. Statistically speaking, I know Genworth did a study years ago about the amount of money that's been lost income for someone who's had to quit their job or promotion to care for their loved one. And I think too, letting go and recognizing that no one's going to do it as good as you think you can do it, and having that faith of that this person knows what they're doing and they have expertise and training in caring for others.
At the end of the day, you would hope that the decision that the family makes is what decision yields the best level of care. Do you find that to be the case, or sadly, at the end of the day, most of that decision is being driven by financials? We just don't have the wherewithal to provide mom or dad's care in a facility that has skilled care and has aides and nurses on staff. So as a result, we've got to look at shoring this responsibility on ourselves, and they can sort of acquiesce to the fact that it's home health care as opposed to something else.
When you sit down, and again, this is the importance of having an outside entity, a professional coming in and really looking at the big picture, because there's lots of variables we need to look at. Again, what are the finances? So working with a financial planner, who's in charge? That's a big question I always ask families. We could talk a whole other episode on the legalities of who has power of attorney, who has medical power of attorney. And so, asking the question of who's in charge. At the end of the day, if someone can't make decisions for themselves, it's going to boil down to who's in charge on paper. If you don't have those documents, then we have another discussion, right? But making those decisions can be very, very challenging. And when you sit down and you look at what's on paper, what's in the best interest of your loved one, do they stay home? Can they afford to stay home? What's it going to cost to stay home? How much does it cost to go to a facility? Do they need to go to independent living, assisted living, memory care, a continuum of care, an adult foster care home, which many people don't know about? It's a group home, basically, for older adults. It's a home that's been modified to accommodate usually 4 to 6 older adults, which for the right person, it's a beautiful option. And they get a great level of care. Usually it's a 2 to 6 ratio, 2 caregivers during the day to 6 people and 1 to 6 at night. Can't get better than that. Again, really putting together that planning. I could say it 100 times. That's going to give your best outcome.
Having some experience in settling estates and seeing the decline of clients and leading ultimately to, sadly, death, you made the comment about, who's in charge. And I think it's so important to have those decisions way ahead of time. And more importantly, to be able to articulate that decision to the immediate and extended family as well. I've seen way too many cases where ultimately the person in charge had to make a very difficult decision, and it opened up a lot of ridicule, a lot of questioning about whether that was the right decision for mom or dad. Some of it came from his or her siblings. Some of it came from extended family, living siblings of the parent, wondering why decisions were made. And I think a lot of that angst at a very difficult time for the families anyway could be eliminated by just making sure, hey, here are the wishes, just so everybody knows it's written down, it's black and white. Any comments on that?
I believe that one of the most important gifts that you can give your family is to express what your wishes are at the end of your life. We are all going to die. That's a fact. One of my intentions in working with families is that when we get to the end of our lifetime, whenever that is, that there is a clear understanding of what you want done, what you don't want done, and that quality of life is so, so important. A big topic that people don't like to talk about is hospice care and palliative care. But again, you need to have these conversations. When you have those conversations, I promise you, when the time comes, it's so much easier. And and everyone knows that you are fulfilling the wishes of the individual. There is no greater gift that you can give to someone than to fulfill their wishes near the end of life. And in order to do so, you got to have those conversations. One of the books that I'll share with the audience as far as resources is a book called Extreme Measures: Finding a Better Path to the End of Life by Dr. Jessica Zitter. She also did a documentary and won an Oscar, I think, or an Emmy about end of life decisions. But yeah, having those conversations are so important, because we're all going to get there. My kids definitely know where that binder is. And that binder, by the way, has been updated within the last 10 years. That's another thing. A lot of times I'll look at documentation that's quite old, quite outdated. And the attorneys, elder law attorneys, the rule of thumb is every 5 to 7 years, you really need to look at your documents to make sure that they're still your wishes and the people that you put in charge are still capable of making those decisions, or are they still alive? So sometimes that needs to be revisited too.
Excellent. Great advice. So we hinted around one of the solutions may very well be long-term care, as in a long-term care insurance policy. The caveat is it's not for everyone. The caveat also is they tend to be extremely expensive these days, much more so than they were decades ago. But do you have any thought on, at the bare minimum, if somebody is looking at venturing that way, looking at transferring the risk to a third party, in this case, an insurance company, what should one look at? Just for the record, as far as I'm concerned, there are essentially 4 drivers to policy cost. Age certainly being a given. The policy gets more expensive the older you are at the time that you go through underwriting. But beyond that, it's the daily benefit. The more it pays out per day, the more expensive it is. The second would be the length of time that the insurance company is essentially on the hook to make those payments. Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 4 years or longer? That's important. I'm sure you have some stats around that. The other is whether the policy is providing a cost of living adjustment with respect to the benefit. That, as a single component, is probably the most expensive thing on a policy. And then the last is the elimination period, or the waiting period. Normally, when you arrive at the nursing home and notify all the participants, it doesn't necessarily mean the insurance company is immediately starting to make payment. There's usually a period of time where you're self-funding. Used to be 30 days was normal. Today, it's 90 days, 180 days, or as much as a year, where you're paying that first year and then they kick in. So that said, I'm sure you have some opinion on what makes for a good policy, what might make for a not so swell policy. Let's hear it.
In the world of long-term care, years ago, and we don't see these anymore, but years ago, they were more lenient. And my father-in-law, was an actuary. Actuaries would kind of project how long people would live and so forth. Well, they certainly were way off when it came to longevity, right, with individuals. So if you're lucky enough to have a policy that has an unlimited benefit, wow, that is a platinum ticket if you qualify, not the golden ticket. But most policies, depending on the policy, again, there's so many variables you can look at, but to have a policy that would last at least 5 years, I feel would be a really good rule of thumb. Estimating what would the monthly cost be if I were in a long-term care facility, if I were in independent living, assisted living, memory care, and the cost goes up. Independent living, you can get away with about $3,000 a month. However, in independent living, your long-term care policy is not going to pay. Why? Because you're independent. But if you're in an assisted living or a memory care facility, on average, an assisted living facility with minimal care might run you around $6,000, $7,000 a month. If you get up to the memory care level, you're looking at probably $8,000 a month. 8 to 9. And then if you truly need nursing care level, you're looking at $10,000 plus. To have a policy that pays out at least a good chunk of that, maybe you can use your investments if you have an annuity or if you have your Social Security to supplement that. Anywhere between $5,000 and $6,000 a month, I would probably use that as my rule of thumb that they would pay out. A 90-day probationary period, or that elimination period where you would have to pay out of pocket for 90 days. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're working in tandem with the financial professional to make sure that you have enough liquid assets to pay for that. And the COLA, or the cost of living, addendum or parameter, a lot of times people will drop that because that is the most costly component. And what I'm seeing a lot is the long-term care policies will send you out when your premium is due every year. They'll say, well, you can stay where you are for this price, or you can drop your benefit for this price. And so they'll give you different options. I do caution folks around saying, oh, the heck with it, I'm just going to drop my policy. I would have some conversations with your financial planner or other individuals that you work closely with before you drop a policy. That, especially if you've been paying on it for a long time. A lot of policies these days, so I would say 5 to 6 years in summation. 90 days is pretty average, unless you have an older policy that has less time. Some people I've seen have an addendum to their policy that decreases that 90-day period, working together to make sure that you meet the parameters of that long-term care policy is really, really important. And one of the policy that I have, actually, on a personal note, is one that if I don't use it, it converts to a life insurance policy. So even if I don't use my $500,000, which is my policy, right? Or if I use a portion thereof, at least I know the rest of my policy will convert into a life insurance policy upon my death. As the expert, Jim, in long-term care policies, there are so many different, I call them hybrids, right, in the market, that if it's something that you can fit into your budget, most people will need some type of care as they age. And it's just like any insurance policy, right? You take it out, you hope you never need it, but boy, if you do, that's a beautiful thing. And if you do, most policies, you don't have to continue paying the premium once the policy is in effect. And that's a beautiful thing.
You have enough other things going on that you don't need to worry about making that premium payment for certain.
That's right.
It's amazing. We get talking and time just goes by. We're kind of up against the clock again, but I did want to just have your opinion, and I'm going to kind of lump this together. So we talked about home health care and how family members often step up to provide that level of care. What do you see in terms of, let's call it, emotional challenges, where now the son or the daughter is effectively becoming the parent of the parent? What's your advice on creating some degree of balance, maybe in an effort to avoid burnout?
Big question, and I'll try and answer it. First and foremost, again, you got to take care of yourself. If you're experiencing exhaustion, burnout, you find yourself being short with your loved one, and you're like, oh boy, that's not me. You need to take a break. It's imperative to take a break. I'm giving everyone the permission to please take a break, give yourself a timeout. Learning some coping skills, whether that's breathing exercises, whether that's meditation, whether that's speaking to a therapist, whether that's going out to dinner once a week with your friends. You need a break. You cannot do this job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So my best advice would be have somebody that you can lean on that's able to give you some relief, and have others pitch in. And when people offer to help, take them up on it. Please take them up on it. People want to give and people want to help. And there's nothing wrong, absolutely, because people will say, oh, what's wrong with me? I can't do this. There's nothing wrong with you. You are human. And as humans, just like we need to sleep at night, you need to have a break, whether it's, again, figure out whatever that looks like, but giving yourself a break and working that into your caregiving responsibilities is so, so important. And then you can be a better caregiver to your loved one. You're going to have a better outcome.
You mentioned taking a break. I know certain communities offer, it's almost like adult daycare, where if you're responsible for mom or dad and you need a break, and you can take them to a safe environment where there is nursing staff, there are aides there, they'll provide meal, and you can just check them in for 5, 6, 7 hours or whatever. You can go about kind of decompressing, getting caught up on things maybe that you've put off because of that. I don't have any personal experience, but I would assume it's just an absolute godsend.
There's two types of respite, right? There is that day component that you spoke of. Typically, those day programs are people with dementia or some type of cognitive decline. We typically have to have a diagnosis to go to these centers. I like to tell folks that I work with that, especially with any type of decline, be it physical or cognitive, having a schedule is so important. So maybe working at a schedule that maybe they go to the day program Tuesdays and Thursdays or Mondays and Wednesdays, so that there's a pattern, and that gives you a break and you an opportunity to make appropriate appointments for yourself. The other type of respite is, and a lot of people don't know this, is within facilities, they offer 30-day respites where, let's say you wanted to go on vacation with your family and you wanted to be gone for 2 weeks, you can kind of check your loved one into a respite entity or at a facility for a 2-week period. It's a fully furnished apartment, all meals included, nursing care and everything. It's also a great way to kind of try it out. Maybe my loved one would be better in a facility. One of the aspects of being in a facility that people don't always look at, first of all, people are always like, I give up, I can't do this anymore. And so I'm going to put my loved one in a facility. Being in a facility also has a tremendous benefit of interacting with other people. And that social aspect, it's priceless, as the commercial would say. I cannot put a monetary value on the importance of being around others. And in the 20-something years that I've been doing this, maybe twice, it's happened where they went back home when you try it out on a respite time frame. Most will tell me, I should have done this sooner. Right. Because, and again, it's an affordability piece as well, but the interaction with other humans, and we found this out during COVID as well, when we were all in seclusion, right? That interaction with another human is so critical. So again, day programs, something to check out, and check out many facilities will offer respite stays for up to 30 days.
Becky, once again, thanks so much. You are a fountain of information. Look, this has been short. It's been informative. Is there anything that I missed that I should have asked you that we just didn't get around to? I will beg, borrow, and steal for a few more minutes if we need it. I wanted to make sure that any important issue that you would like to tell our listeners, we get out and we get recorded for their benefit.
The big takeaway, I feel, is that it takes a village, right? As cliche as it might be. The aging process is not easy. You don't know everything. I don't know everything, but I can tell you that I know where to find that information. Knowing that you don't know everything is super important, and knowing that there are people and there are experts that can help you and guide you in this journey. Educate yourself as much as possible. I'll share, I'm a huge reader, several books that I've read over the years, from I'm a caregiver, how can I do a better job, to end of life issues, to caring for myself and my loved one. There are some great books that you can read that can give you some wonderful insight. The aging process can be very challenging, but I do believe that with proper planning, proper support, and asking for that support, seeking that support, it can be a really beautiful process, and for yourself and for your loved one. And I have another quote though, real quick before we
Sure.
wrap up. You made my quotes.
We always have time for quotes.
So Rosalind Carter, our former First Lady, this is a very famous quote that she spoke about with regard to caregiving. There are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. Mm-hmm. So we're all going to be caregivers. We all are caregivers in some capacity. And, my hope is that in this journey of caring, especially as we talk about older adults and aging, that, we do so with grace, providing dignity and kindness and compassion for our older adult population, because we're all going to get there, hopefully.
That's our hope. Well, once again, thanks so much. I know you'd mentioned a few books, And I know you'd mentioned that you're going to send us a list of some books. We'll make sure that we put those in the show notes, so that'll be a resource for everybody.
I'll include that caregiver checklist as well that I mentioned.
Perfect. Last question is, how do listeners get a hold of you?
So best way is my cell phone. You can text me, you can call me. I'll absolutely call you back. I try very, very hard to call people back within 24 hours, but my cell phone is 248-752-4389. You can go to my website, Eizen Consulting Group, and it's EIZ as in zebra, enconsultinggroup.com. And you can email me, Becky@eizenconsultinggroup.com. And it's absolutely been a pleasure and an honor. And I really, really hope that the listeners have gotten some good nuggets of information.
You've been most helpful and quite informative. Thank you very much, Becky.
My pleasure.
And Becky, let me echo Jim here by saying thank you so much. You shared your time and you shared some great insights here. Now, this conversation, along with our previous one, can serve as a great source of guidance and resource for caregivers. So listeners, if you didn't hear the first episode, make sure you do. And don't forget to check out the show notes for other links to past episodes and ways to reach out to Becky for further expertise on caregiving. We do hope today's discussion has equipped you with tools to navigate your caregiving journey with confidence. Please be sure to subscribe to the Retirement Engineer podcast so you don't miss future episodes, and follow @Kaydan Wealth on social. Let us know what you think in the comments, and please share topics you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. Following and sharing this podcast helps our small show make a larger impact.
Thank you for listening to The Retirement Engineer with Jim Kruzan. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.kaydanwealth.com or give us a call at 800-638-6900. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of Jim Kruzan and this episode's guests, not necessarily those of Kaydan Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.